Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our latest virtual town hall. For those that I don't know, I'm Congressman Mike Levin, proud to represent South Orange County and North County, San Diego in the United States House of Representatives. And thank you for tuning in. You know, when I first ran for Congress back in 2017, I pledged to do at least one town hall a month, and we have now done 115. It's hard to believe, but this is our 115th, and the different formats work well for different people. We do in-person, virtual, and telephone town halls, and we really appreciate your tuning in. We've got a lot of great questions from all over our district. We'll get to as many of them as we can. But first, I do have a few updates from here in Washington, D.C. First, I wanted to spend just a minute and address the culture of political violence that is very pervasive in our country right now. Obviously, the latest assassination attempt on former President Trump, in Florida, was despicable. It was reprehensible. It must be condemned. I believe that we cannot accept as commonplace this sort of reality. Political violence should have no place in our nation or anywhere, period. And I think we should strive instead to be a country where we can speak about issues, we can have good faith disagreements, but we do so in a safe and a constructive manner. No one should ever feel threatened because of their political affiliation, their ideology, their political party in the United States of America. And look, we have an opportunity to express our political differences at the ballot box, and that's how we should do it. Never, never with violence. I hope collectively that as we approach the election, that we can, while we disagree, we can do so without, adding to the violent rhetoric that's out there. Rather, I'd hope we can turn down the temperature. But make no mistake, there are real differences in this election. I think it's important that we all acknowledge, those of us who have kids, as I do, two great kids at home, 12 and 10 years old, that they're watching how we overcome this moment of heightened political division in our country. And I hope that everybody watching this or listening to this will join me in denouncing political violence in all its forms. And also, let's work together to seek common sense compromise whenever and however we can. With that, I want to turn to our congressional race. Many of you have been asking me about the advertising. You may have seen our ads. You may have seen our opponents' ads. And I want to make one thing clear. I am the only candidate in our race that's been endorsed by Planned Parenthood, and the only one that believes women should have access to all the reproductive medical care that they need. I support codifying Roe versus Wade, full stop, into federal law, and I also support protecting IVF. Women should always have full bodily autonomy and should not have to fear being unable to get the health care that they need. And don't take it from me, take it from our local Planned Parenthood, who said, and I quote, "There's only one pro-choice candidate for Congress in the 49th District. Mike Levin has strongly stood in defense of reproductive rights. He has a 100% pro-choice voting record every year he has been in Congress. His opponent opposed Proposition 1 to protect abortion rights after the overturning of Roe v. Wade. We trust Mike Levin and strongly endorse him for re-election. And I am very grateful to Planned Parenthood for that endorsement and support." I also want to mention that I'm very closely watching the wildfires in our region, in neighboring districts. I've been in touch with local and state officials and my colleagues to offer my support on the federal level. And I've been coordinating with the U.S. Forest Service and our local fire agencies. I also strongly support more staffing and funding for fire stations throughout the region, and I'll continue to advocate for that. Wildfires, as we all know, have become part of our daily lives in California, and we've got to be ready to deal with them when they occur. And it's important that the federal government deploy its full resources to protect our communities. Let me also mention immigration and border security. I hear from so many of you that it is a top priority of yours, just as it is a top priority of mine. And I want to share with you what I am seeing on the ground. Last Monday, I visited the Border Patrol station down in Boulevard near, it's in East County near the border there, to gain a better understanding at the 3-month mark of the impact of President Biden's executive action on asylum. I visited that same area back in May and also back in July. And it was important that once I saw what was happening in May, the president's executive action came in June. I wanted to go back at the 1-month mark and the 3-month mark. And I've been to the border many times since being in Congress these last 5.5 years. And I can tell you what I saw in May was deeply troubling. I saw hundreds of people who were trying to come in from all around the world, including many countries with whom we did not have and do not have repatriation agreements in place. And it was very clear to me that we needed order at the border. And so I advocated, and fortunately, the president agreed to take a fairly significant, very significant steps on the border to deal with the asylum process, to change the way that credible fear is conducted by our Border Patrol agents. And what I saw at the 1-month mark was a 20% reduction in crossings between ports of entry. And most notably, last Monday, I saw a 54% reduction between before the executive action and after. And that is a big thing. What that has meant is that our Border Patrol agents, the men and women who are doing very hard work down there, they are able to focus on their core responsibilities, back on their core mission, which includes human trafficking, drug trafficking, and of course, potential terrorism. And what we've seen locally, including in our district, is they have done a lot more seizure of narcotics, including recently 105 pounds of fentanyl was seized at the San Clemente checkpoint. Now, when the asylum process was less orderly and Border Patrol was stretched incredibly thin, there were times when that checkpoint could not operate. And so it's critically important that we get Border Patrol the resources that they need, the technology that they need, as well as the situation at the border being as orderly as it possibly can be. Now, I want to see comprehensive immigration reform with a path to citizenship for those who are doing the right things, who are paying taxes, who are playing by the rules, and who are contributing positively to our economy and our society. But the reality is there are far too many politicians of both parties who would rather have the issue of immigration for electoral purposes. And that certainly was the case when Donald Trump decided to kill a bipartisan border deal that was largely negotiated by Senator Langford, one of the most conservative senators. He was there along with Senator Sinema and Senator Murphy in the Senate. And many of us in the House have been having these discussions straight through. I've been part of discussions on the Dignity Act and bills preceding that for some time. And I can tell you that we need to roll up our sleeves and come together and figure out where we have common ground and then act on that common ground. I've said all along, will continue to say, this is not a partisan matter, or at least it should not be. I see it as a nonpartisan matter of national security, and I'm committed to working across the aisle with anyone who is reasonable and pragmatic to try to make positive progress. Let me next say another very important thing. The president had this executive action. Executive actions can be undone. And what we need is common sense, comprehensive congressional legislation that cannot be as easily undone. Let me also address the funding deadline. I know many of you are concerned about that. Government funding runs out on September the 30th, and we have to pass what's called a continuing resolution to fund our government. We expect a vote on a stopgap funding measure that'll keep government funding at its current levels and run through December 20. I'm very pleased to tell you that looks like it's going to move forward without any controversial or extreme provisions. That's just after Mike Johnson and Republicans failed to advance a 6-month continuing resolution that did have very extreme provisions included. But look, the whole ordeal to me is emblematic of what we have seen in these last 2 years from Speaker Johnson and before him Speaker McCarthy. It is dysfunction. and it is chaos within the Republican conference. I have seen independent analysis suggesting that the current Congress with Republicans in charge is historically one of the least productive, all the way back since 1861. However, if you look at the Congress that preceded it, when Nancy Pelosi and House Democrats had the gavels, were in charge, one of the most productive Congresses in the last 70 years. So there's a significant difference, and I think that's reflective of the two parties at this time. The Republicans are putting these short-term funding bills up time and time again because they're unable to pass year-long funding bills and really unwilling to reach bipartisan solutions to meet our ongoing needs. I think it's short-sighted. I think we need to get back to actual bipartisan work to fund the government, as has been the case in decades past. I will mention I'm very disappointed that this stopgap funding bill will not include an additional $12 billion that the VA needs to be able to administer VA healthcare. The popularity of the Honoring Our Pact Act, which we passed to honor those from Iraq, Afghanistan, and other post 9/11 wars who served in those wars, who were injured and or have health conditions related to their service, whether it's respiratory conditions or cancers related to exposure to toxic substances and burn pits. We passed that bill on a broad bipartisan basis, and the success of that bill has been extraordinary. We've had over 4,000 people just in our congressional district sign up for care under the Honoring Our Pact Act. Now that VA needs to pay the bill, we have to work together to make sure that that gets done in a reasonable and bipartisan fashion. So we have a lot of work to do between now and the end of the year. I know we have an election coming up in just over 6 weeks, but we have a lot to do, once we get back to Washington post-election. Let me now turn to some of your questions, and we got many questions here. And I will begin with Dan in Vista. Well, Dan asks, can you update us on the situation with the potential government shutdown? Dan, if you were just listening, I hope I did that. I gave that update. Again, I think we're going to pass this continuing resolution, hopefully as early as tomorrow. The other interesting thing I can share is that we're doing the continuing resolution requiring a 2/3 vote. The way that you can get things on the House floor and get them to become a law, get them to pass the House to become a law, is either with 50% or a majority if you pass through the Rules Committee, or if the Rules Committee will not pass the bill, then you need to go with a 2/3 vote on suspension of the rules. And the Rules Committee, unfortunately, has been stacked with some pretty extreme people by Kevin McCarthy, and they're still there, and they wouldn't allow this 3-month clean continuing resolution to advance. And so we're in this situation where we need a 2/3 vote. That means we're going to have, probably every Democrat, along with maybe half of the Republicans that vote for this bill. But I'm pretty confident we're going to get every Democrat to vote for this bill. And once again, Speaker Johnson, just as Speaker McCarthy before him, is relying on Democratic votes to pass government funding. It's very unfortunate. Sandy in Carlsbad, she writes, I am a Carlsbad resident and new here. Well, Sandy, welcome to our beautiful congressional district. It's an honor to serve as your representative. She says, being my representative, please help me understand why parents of minors who use any gun or assault rifle are not held criminally responsible. Would that not make sure parents are more aware of their children's mental states, what they're buying, or what company they keep? Is making guns available or looking the other way not an accomplice to the crime? What does responsible parenting mean if it cannot mean being responsible for my child's destruction? When my daughter broke a glass table, I was not there, but no one hesitated to send me the bill. What's the difference? Well, Sandy, thank you very much for your thoughts. I think you make very strong arguments. And I think as you may be aware, the father of the recent school shooter in Georgia is being charged after allegedly giving his son the gun that the school shooting was used for. that obviously was beyond irresponsible by that father. And I think that in these types of terrible situations, yes, I think the parents do, in fact, bear some responsibility. I am a member of the Gun Violence Prevention Task Force, and I will take that back to them. And I think we'll look at further exploring this idea, what that may look like. I can tell you that personally, um, as the parent of a 12-year-old and a 10-year-old, it's very important to me that when our kids go to homes of their friends, that we know that any guns in the home are safely stored by those parents. I'm going to keep working very hard on safe storage legislation. We know, based on our partnership over these last several years with the Brady campaign, that when guns are safely stored in the home, gun-related accidents are 74% less likely. And I've now, for a number of years, had the bipartisan Prevent Family Fire Act, and we've got to continue to move the legislation. Again, I can't tell you how, as a parent of young kids, how disappointed I am that my kids still have to go through active shooter drills. I remember as a kid in Southern California, we had earthquake drills, and now they have active shooter drills. It's really, really sad. So I'll have my staff follow up with you about this. And again, welcome to our great community. Teresa in Encinitas writes, do you think Bibi Netanyahu is escalating regional conflicts purposefully to create instability right before the U.S. elections? What more can the U.S. do to keep the region from all-out war? Well, I appreciate that, Teresa, and I think you're referring to the recent escalation in violence between Israel and Hezbollah. I will say that in general, I think that Prime Minister Netanyahu's actions tend to be more about political self-preservation, in Israel rather than the U.S. election. I know he has very difficult politics at home. His governing coalition has consistently been on the brink of collapse now for many months. He's deeply unpopular in his own country. And I think he's unlikely to be in a position to keep his job after the next elections. And look, I have made it very clear I am no fan of his. I actually, in December of last year, after the horrific October 7th attack, I called for new leadership in Israel, and that's through a democratic process. The people of Israel ultimately have to make that decision and choose their leaders as a democracy. I think it is worth noting, Hezbollah has fired thousands, I believe 8,000 rockets into Israel since October 7th, and that is absolutely unacceptable. The latest escalation, I believe, after a Hezbollah rocket killed 12 children in Israel, just as we have for now 2 years. I think that she's going to lead a coalition, just as President Biden has, to try to continue to support Ukraine to fight against Putin's expansionism. I have said all along that my big concern is that if we were to abandon Ukraine, allow Putin to take Kyiv, that there's no question in my mind he would follow that by going after a NATO ally. And when you represent the young men and women at Camp Pendleton the way that I do, and you get to know them, there is absolutely no more severe discussion than potentially sending them into harm's way. And we have to prevent that. And helping Ukraine today to prevent a further escalation with a NATO ally that would require the involvement of American men and women is certainly, in my view, the right approach. Let's see. Next question is Dawn in San Juan Capistrano. Dawn asks, how are the Dems responding to Trump's switch in position regarding SALT? Well, for those that have been following, this is the state and local tax deduction, which you used to be able to deduct fully your state and local taxes on your federal tax bill. That was the case for about 100 years until 2017, when the Trump tax bill capped state and local tax deductions at $10,000. And that hurt anybody in our district who owns a home, because chances are your property taxes alone will put you over that $10,000 cap. So this was a big deal. And it was not just a big deal for the wealthy, but for also many of the middle class folks in our district who are so fortunate to own a home, and even for some who aren't homeowners. I can tell you that I have been fully supportive and very actively involved in efforts to repeal the SALT cap. And we repealed it via legislation that passed the House, but not the Senate. We did it again in the Build Back Better legislation. We increased the cap to $80,000, but again, passed the House, but not the Senate. And here's the thing, if we do nothing at all, that cap will expire at the end of next year, because the way the Trump tax plan was written, the major tax provisions expire. And there's a big debate over whether they should continue or not. If those provisions continue, and they continue in particular for the wealthy and the big corporations, then we will add another $5 to $10 trillion to our national debt, based on independent economic analyses from Moody's and Goldman Sachs and others. So I don't give much credence to Donald Trump, during his rally in New York the other day, saying he was going to, end SALT, or give you back SALT. I forget his exact phrase. I really don't trust what he says day in and day out. I just, the evidence suggests that he's willing to pretty much say whatever he thinks that will help re-election and his attempt to retake power. So when he says that he's for SALT or against SALT, I don't think we can trust him one way or the other. Donna in Vista, excuse me, she writes, the racial division and hatred stoked by those who want to win a political contest by dividing us in a culture war are doing great damage to our society. What happened in Springfield, Ohio, could so easily happen here in California, where we have a wide variety of cultures living side by side and yet not really interacting with each other. Do you have any ideas how we can heal some of these divisions, or at least begin to address them, and address the lies being perpetrated against immigrants and people of color? Is there anything we can do before this gets even worse? Well, I appreciate that very much, Donna, and I can tell you what I do, which is to try to call out that kind of bigotry anytime I see it. That's certainly the case with the awful comments made by former President Trump at the debate and since about Springfield. I think it's important that we're not silent in the face of these, sort of racist, vile sorts of attacks. Look, I think, a lot of times we talk about tolerance. We talk about tolerating our differences. I think it's important that we try to appreciate one another, not just tolerate one another. When we have neighbors or community members who have different backgrounds from our own, I think it's important that we not just tolerate them, but get to know them, interact with them, and hopefully over time appreciate the differences. I know I try to do that. I wish more would. I think it's so much easier to fearmonger, target groups of people when others see them as monolithic rather than as humans, as individual human beings who are all worthy of respect and dignity. And my hope is that we also elect leaders who are going to denounce this sort of thing. We have to acknowledge that whoever's elected president of the United States creates a permission structure of behavior to a certain degree. And demonizing immigrants and condemning harmful language, I think, is really, the demonization of immigrants must stop. The condemnation of that sort of language must be, how we proceed. Stacy in San Diego writes, hey, Mike, can you do something about SDGE and their outrageous costs? Stacy, I completely agree. Their costs have been outrageous. I come at this from two angles. I try to do all I can to oppose actions that I see that the Public Utilities Commission are making, and at the state level that will add charges to our bills. That's one thing I've done. And then second, I've tried to help by deploying federal incentives to reduce the cost of electricity. Both are important. Earlier this year, I strongly pushed back on the PUC for their net metering decision, and then another to add a new monthly fixed charge on utility bills. Um, I think that there were some utilities who wanted a fixed charge of $70, $100. It was just ridiculous. And we did push back. The charge landed at, I think, around $24 per month. Still too much for my liking. And it raises the cost of your bill regardless of how much electricity you're actually using. It totally discourages the behaviors that we're hopeful to see. So I'm not happy about it. It's a lot better than the 70, 80, 90, or $100 charge that these folks wanted. And then, the other thing I will mention is the tremendous incentives that we were able to pass as part of the Inflation Reduction Act. Those have helped lower electricity bills by, helping people invest in their own clean electricity systems. And I think that makes for a very worthwhile investment for us as federal policymakers. Next up is David in Oceanside. David writes, now that the Harris Walls ticket are discussing Project 2025 at each event, people seem to be more aware of the detrimental policies for a Trump agenda. Do the rest of the Republicans in Congress plan to try and pass these policies as well if they keep the House and Harris wins and Dems hold the Senate? Well, I have no doubt that they will try, but they will fail if Harris wins and Dems hold the Senate. My fear is what happens if they get the White House, the House, and the Senate. I think they've laid out the agenda, and Donald Trump can pretend that he doesn't know what Project 2025 is, hasn't read it, doesn't want to read it. But the reality is that people surrounding Trump and the folks who would be making up the Trump administration are fully bought in on Project 2025. And we know that from a number of recordings that have been occurred, that have been recorded privately, that have been reported on. They know full well what it is they're doing. And, one piece of Project 2025 would make it significantly harder to vote. We've already seen House Republicans support policies like that, bring them up for votes on the House floor. So I have no doubt they would try. But I think we've got a lot of folks who now know what Project 2025 is. I saw a poll this morning from NBC that it had only a 4% approval rating. 4%. That's truly extraordinary. And among those who'd heard of it, there were still roughly 25 or 30% who hadn't heard anything about it. And I think the margin of error of the poll was probably 4 points. But look, here's the broader thing. I think we've seen how disagreement is treated within the Republican Party. It is discouraged, and to the point where those who have disagreed with the party orthodoxy and with MAGA specifically, think about Liz Cheney or Adam Kinzinger or Mitt Romney. They are either gone or they're leaving from the Republican Party. It's not a broad big tent anymore, and that's really a shame. I can tell you the Democratic Party is certainly a big tent. We have internal disagreements all the time, and that's a good and healthy thing. It seems as though the Republican Party has sort of become an empty vessel for whatever Trump wants it to be, and that is not healthy for the United States or for our Democratic partners around the world, because our democracy at home informs our ability to influence democracy around the world. Scott in Encinitas writes, although this is a local issue, the death of a 63-year-old man because deputies at the county jail completely ignored his need for insulin, and the county coroner has ruled it a homicide. The situation in the San Diego County Jail seems to me to warrant federal intervention. There are just too many deaths, and this last one is so outrageous, so cruel, and so intentional that it seems to me there's no doubt that federal civil rights are being violated. This is like Les Miserables in San Diego County Jail. The state doesn't seem to be doing anything about it. Is there no way the feds can do something about this? Scott, I did see this article in the UT, I believe it was Friday of last week. I found it incredibly upsetting. I don't think anybody should be treated the way that this individual was, that the description explains. I think everybody should have the access to the medication they need to survive, for goodness sake. I want to share something. It doesn't get directly or exactly at your concern, but I am a co-sponsor of a bill called the Due Process Continuity of Care Act. And what that legislation does is allow pretrial detainees to receive Medicaid benefits so that they can continue to receive health care. But I'm going to look into how the federal government can engage on this specific issue that you raised with our county jails, and I'll make sure that staff connects with you. Ted in San Clemente writes, well, I appreciate that the Inflation Reduction Act was the largest and most impactful climate bill to date. What are the Democrats' priorities for the environment and to further combat climate change if you're able to take back the House? Well, Ted, I very much appreciate that question, and I've been giving it thought. I can tell you top of mind for me is a bill that I've been working on for some time with my dear friend Sean Casten of Illinois called CETA, the Clean Electricity Transmission Acceleration Act. And you might be able to tell from the title that it's all about transmission and making sure that as we electrify and decarbonize, that we build out the grid commensurate with what is needed. And we're going to need a lot more transmission and distribution capacity for all of the new clean electricity that we're going to need to generate to get that electricity from where it's being generated to where it's being used. And right now the reality is that it's very difficult to build multi-state large transmission lines. And we need to make it as easy to build those lines as it is to build a multi-state oil pipeline or gas pipeline. I just want to see a level playing field, and I want to see the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, have greater jurisdiction in those multi-state transmission projects. So the good news is we've got around 80 co-sponsors on our bill. I think that it has a lot of momentum. We just have to continue. Obviously, we have to win the House. Otherwise, it's not going anywhere with Republicans. Unfortunately, a lot of the Republicans see transmission and electrification as a threat rather than an opportunity. And that's really a shame. I continue to try as best I can behind the scenes to educate anybody willing to speak with me about clean energy. And I very much appreciate the question. Shannon in Carlsbad says, I live in Carlsbad, and I'm wondering what citizens or leaders can do to stop having the Cheetahs strip club banner being flown over our beaches. Get all kinds of questions here, folks. It's always either a tree nursery, Coors Light, Geico, and then Cheetahs with an outline of a female pole dancer. I don't think this is what the local people want to see while at the beach, most often enjoying time with families and children. I'm not a conservative person, but wanted to try making a difference. I feel it's not the place to advertise a gentleman's club and wish my kids and my community didn't have to see that whenever at the beach. Well, I have to tell you, I have to take my kids to the beach all the time. I go to Doheny Beach often or to San Clemente. I've never seen an advertisement like that, but I certainly wouldn't like it if I saw one. I will have my staff look into it further. I can tell you I think the FAA may have some jurisdiction, but I'll have to look into that. I don't know. I know that it's the FAA jurisdiction when there's a safety issue. This I don't think is a safety issue. But I think the question is whether it's something we want the FAA to address directly, or maybe it's something a city ordinance or a state law could solve. But I very much appreciate the question, and we can have staff follow up. Jean in Del Mar, she writes, the sewage problem at the border is affecting residents, wildlife, and it seems like nothing is improving. The pollution is spreading north and needs addressing now. It affects tourism, small businesses, and all of Southern California. Can you provide an update on this? I am happy to provide an update on it. I tell you, I'm just as frustrated about it as you. You go back to the end of 2019 with the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement when I helped secure $300 million for the United States to begin to address this problem. The South Bay wastewater treatment plant has been really, dysfunctional, out of order now for many years, and it was originally built in the 90s, and it hasn't been functioning properly for quite some time. There are two problems. One is that it doesn't do a very good job of handling the 25 million gallons per day that it's designed to to tolerate, but also that 25 million gallons a day is not enough for the flows that we've seen in recent years. So we need 50 or perhaps 75 million gallons a day. Now, the 300 million, I got that all the way, along with my colleagues, along with Speaker Pelosi and many others that worked on that. We got it all the way back in 2019. And then we've had 4 years of delays from the IBWC, the EPA. It's unacceptable, completely unacceptable. And I've said so, and I'll continue to say so. And, the money was 300, and then we were told it would take 600. And we were able, I give my friend Scott Peters great credit. We're able to go and get another 156, I believe, $million on top of the 300. So now they have over 450 million, and they got to get to work. I saw where the design build contract was finally approved, but they're saying it could take up to 7 years to construct. It's completely unacceptable. And I think the entire community should demand that it goes faster than that, and they get to work. They don't have to build everything all at once, but they need to get to work, and they should have done it long ago. It's deeply, deeply frustrating. I share your frustration. You might wonder, why does the North County San Diego representative care about what's happening in the South Bay? Well, the reality is it impacts us all. The water quality and air quality impacts those at the border or the southern part of San Diego County the most, but it impacts us all in the northern part of the county as well. We've got to do everything we can to address it, and I'm committed to that. Ashley in Oceanside writes, I watched the Oprah Winfrey town hall with VP Kamala Harris, and in an answer regarding the economy, she mentioned price gouging as part of the problem. As someone struggling with rising costs from food to rent, do you agree price gouging is a problem, and what can be done to hold companies accountable for it? Do you see the solution bringing down prices or holding them steady? Well, look, addressing high costs, I think, is incredibly important, Ashley. It's been a top priority of mine. I do think that, you had a scenario where there are certain industries, certain companies that are engaged in price gouging and market manipulation. I think it's more significant in some industries than others. For example, I think in California, the oil or the gasoline refineries, a limited number of gasoline refineries, I think they have been engaged in market manipulation. I've said so. I've actually called for a federal investigation into their practices. We've seen irregularities in spot market transactions and, extremely volatile pricing with planned and unplanned outages. So I've called for the FTC at the federal level to investigate potential anti-competitive behavior by the oil refineries. That's one example. Look, I think that addressing costs is key. I think that the federal government has a role to play in things like housing, things like insurance. We've tried to address the grocery supply chains as well from the pandemic. But I think we have a lot more work to do. I'm particularly concerned with home insurance. Got a bill with Adam Schiff called the Insure Act that would provide for a federal reinsurance program for wildfire prone areas where the policies would have to be issued and premiums would have to be reduced so people can actually get insurance for their homes. I think housing is another key area, and we've got to bring those prices down however we can. Got to make it easier for people to build. The low-income housing tax credit needs to be expanded. The first-time homebuyers tax credit should be expanded. I want to see a program for our first responders and our nurses and our teachers, akin to what we have for the VA home loan program. That's a bill we have called the Helper Act. There's a lot more we need to do. But I think, yes, the federal government does need to do all it can to address costs. And part of that is try to address price gouging wherever it may be occurring. I thank you for the question. Sue in Vista writes, if the Dems hold the House, the Senate, and win back the House, I like that question, Sue, will they try to pass the 2019 For the People Act again and codify Roe among their first priorities? If not, what are the first priorities being discussed? Well, you are absolutely spot on, Sue. I think those will be two of the very top priorities. Now, I can tell you that they will require, both of those bills will require if we pass them in the House, which I'm confident we would if we had the majority, and if Kamala Harris is president, we know she would sign them if they get to her desk, but it will require the Senate. And both of those bills ran into resistance in the Senate because of the filibuster. The For the People Act, the Women's Health Protection Act, they ran into challenges with the filibuster, getting to 60 votes. So what I want to see is for the Senate to at least have a carve out, if they're not going to do away with the filibuster, have a carve out for fundamental rights like voting rights and women's rights. I personally think that would be the right move, and I think it could be done in a manner that's respectful, commensurate with the history of the Senate and procedures of the Senate. And that's what I will be advocating to do. I think it's interesting that some of the biggest advocates for the filibuster, Joe Manchin, Kirsten Sinema, the late Senator Feinstein, they, as of next year, will not be serving in the Senate anymore. I would hope that the new senators will do all they can to address the challenges and the problems with the filibuster moving forward. And so I think you're spot on. Maria in Laguna Niguel writes, are UNDEMs in swing states and districts experiencing a positive down ballot impact from Vice President Harris, trending more favorably in the polls? If not, how can we message voters now through November 5th? Well, I can tell you we've seen tremendous enthusiasm and momentum on the ground in our campaign. It has been tremendous. And in fact, if you look at the last 5 or 6 weeks, we've been knocking on more doors than ever before. And that includes the great wave election in 2018. And that's a lot of volunteers, a lot of effort, and a lot of time. And I'm incredibly grateful to all the volunteers, call them the VIPs, the volunteers in politics, that are making that happen. And we need their help in the home stretch. And just the same, I want to give a thanks to all of my team, our tremendous campaign team, and everybody that does the hard work for us in Washington, D.C. and at the district level as well. And I want to thank Jeremy, our great virtual town hall coordinator, who's now done 115 of these. He told me just before that he's now expecting, that he and his wife are expecting their second child. Congratulations to him. And I want to tell my wife, if she's watched this far, that I love her very much. And I'll be coming home soon for the home stretch before the election. So until we meet again, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. If you didn't get your question asked, you can email me by visiting my website. You can also email me directly. The URL is mikelevin.org, MIKELEVIN.org, or you can email info@mikelevin.org. Again, thanks to everybody for joining. I hope everyone has a great evening, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the district sometime very soon. Take care, everyone.